Hi everyone. So today we would be actually learning something pretty basics in Python, and that is the different data types in Python. So the first question, without further ado, let's start. And the first question that comes in mind is, what is data type? So in everyday life, we actually experiences a lot of types of data. And what do mean by lots of types of data? It could be numeric, it could be alphabetic, and so on and so forth. So the data could be anything that can be stored, and I have talked about it in one of the other videos that anything that can be stored can regarded as data. And in computer or in any language, programming language specifically, we might need to work with different kinds of data. Now, we need to define sometimes the type of data, or at least the programming language needs to define the type of data to understand properly and do any function accordingly. So, say for example, if you want to lowercase all the letters in a sentence, you want to basically make it all in lowercase. So this is a kind of function that you can do only if your if all the letter if it only has letters, right? You can't do it on a number because lowercasing on a number doesn't make sense. So a computer or your system needs to know what kind of data you are working with to do any kind of operation. And not only that, but different data types also actually can have different kind of spaces, because say for example some data type will take more memory or more space in your system, whereas some data type might not. So basically there could be different data types, and in Python you have a lot of types built in the basic Python that comes in. And what do I mean by built in? Because we would probably later on visit that there could be a lot of libraries or packages that you can install in Python, which kinds of make it more powerful, which kinds of give it more capabilities, more flexibility, and lots of features. So you can install these packages or libraries in your Python, but without all these packages, without all these libraries, just the bareback minimum Python, whatever there is, it already has some built-in data types, and we would today talk about those data types. Before I actually go into that, just wanted to mention, though I am trying to discuss Python over here, but usually if you want to do any other language, like say for example you could be interested in JavaScript or JS, you might have heard about C or C sharp, things like that. So if you have, or if you are familiar with this kind of programming languages, different programming languages may have slightly different data types. Not every language has the same data type, because again the way everyone actually tries to understand or compile the codes is different. And that's why you would see, but there are some common points. It's not like they are completely not related to each other. There are some common data types, and again there would be some points of differences as well. But why is this so? Like, why does actually different languages have different kinds of data types, and what kind of benefits or advantage disadvantage it might have? So there one clear disadvantage or advantage that you can think of is in terms of the processing speed or the execution time for a code. Let's say in Python, and we will pretty soon see that in Python, when you actually are defining a data type, you don't have to write it explicitly. Let's say for example, if I want, let's say there's a one kind of uh, there's one kind of data which is integer. Now if you want to basically define an integer, you can just simply write x equals to 5, something as simple as that. You don't have to basically mention that whatever I am trying to defining over here, this is an integer. In fact, in some languages you have to explicitly define it. If you don't define it, it would basically results in an error. But in Python, basically the interpreter understands by your way of writing the code that what kind of data you are, what type of data you are basically trying to refer. And since Python basically makes it easy for the user, but it is basically doing an extra step under the hood, right, which is not basically done by the user. And because of this reason, Python becomes much slower than a lot of contemporary languages like C, where you have to actually define explicitly what kind of data type you are working with. In Python, you don't have to do it, which is why it makes it easier for the user, but at the same time, it's trade off with the speed. So Python takes more time in executing one code in compared to C. And this kind of similar point can be raised for other languages as well. So if you are familiar with MATLAB, you might have heard about a programming language called MATLAB, which kind of refers to matrix laboratory. So there's inherently just one main type of data there, which is matrices. So everything that you do have to be done through matrices. So, and why is that so? It might make a steeper learning curve because you have to kind of convert everything to matrix to work with. But the good thing about that is when you actually make your complete programming language in based on just one single type of data, you can actually do a lot of optimization and make your codes, make your processes much faster on that particular data type. So this is also another reason why you would see so much variety in terms of different types of data. So let's now move on, and today what we would do is I would showcase some of the very common data types in Python and would just show you very small examples to give you a just sense of how you can define them or how you can work with them. This is not again an exhaustive list, and we would probably experience or we would basically face some other data types later on when we actually work with something else. Okay, the first data type is very interesting, is textual type of data, also known as string. So what do I mean by textual type of data? Say for example, we might be interested in your name or something like that. So anything which have characters, alphabetic characters in it, or it can actually have numeric characters as well. We can define even numeric characters as string. So anything that we want to just regard as just a character and don't want to do any numerics and something like that can be regarded as string. So just to give you an example, let's first open up our command prompt and go to Python. You know the drill, so just opening up command prompt, changing my location. Okay, I can just do it from here directly, the Python interpreter itself, opening up over here. Okay, now how do you define a string? You can directly write anything inside a quote. It can be a single quote or it can be a double quote. Let's write our channel's name, Intelligent Learner. So this is how you basically define a string or a text type. Here x is a variable. This is also a very crucial concept in programming language, where anything that you want to store, it can be stored in a variable and we can probably change it as well. So it can be changed, the variable can be changed, at least in Python we can change the variable, and that is why it's called variable, because it can vary. The value it retains can be varies. So so that later on I don't have to basically write the same thing again, the value again and again. That's why we use some kind of storage system to basically capture that value, right? Here in case we are writing the name of the channel, which is Intelligent Learner, and we don't want to actually write intelligent learner again and again and again. That's why we are basically defining it as a variable. We can change it later on as well if we need. Okay, just pressing enter, and now if I just type x, you can see the value. And there's another function in Python called type, which basically tells me the kind of data type the variable has. So here intelligent learner is a string. Similarly, so this is the first kind of data type that we talked about. Now, then the next type of data that we can work with, and I'm not elaborating on string because it can be of different types. It can be defined similarly, like as I just shown you, just from a single quote. You can use double quotes, sometimes triple quotes as well. So it's actually very easy to actually understand what it tries to do. Then there's another data type called, let's actually call it numeric type of data, because a numeric type data can be int, it can be a float, it can be complex number as well. So these are different data types, these int, float, complex, these are different data types that you can have in Python. Usually we do not deal with complex numbers if you are not in specifically mathematics or physics, but most of the time what we require is int and float. So these are two numeric data types. So int basically refers to integer. You know what an integer is. It could be like -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are integers, whole numbers. And there is the float, which has like decimal, which have places after the decimal places, like it could be 5.0, 5.5, 6.7, things like that. And it's very simple to basically look at how you define them in Python. So I can just again write x equals to 5, and this also basically shows how you can change the value of a variable. So initially I defined it as a string, but now I defined it as x equals to 5, and if I just again try to return x, it will give me 5, not the intelligent learner which we defined earlier. And again, to just see like, okay, what kind of data x is now, so I again write the type function. So this is a function type, and now you can see it's int, so it is telling me the type of data is int. Similarly, if I say x equals to 5.0, it may look very same to you, like 5 and 5.0, the value kinds of same to you, but for the computer, since you defined it slightly differently, it basically tells the computer that it is a float value instead of a int value. So again, writing x equals to 5.0, and now if I just trying to put type of x, it will give you a float. So floating number basically means if a number has any values after decimal places. And usually, just a tip over here, usually float numbers take up more memory or more space in your computer than integer numbers. So though 5 and 5.0 might look very similar to you, but in reality 5.0 actually takes up more space in your computer. Okay, now again moving on, so we have covered text, we have covered numeric types. Then there is also another type uh, or class of data types, which is sequence type database. So instead of, so up until this point you saw like me actually defining things which is just a single value, right? It's not taking up multiple values, it's just single value. But in Python you might want to work with multiple values at once, right? And want to store multiple values at once. So for those for that you have a class, basically class of data types, which is one is called list, which is in my opinion one of the most important data types in Python, list. Then you can also have another data type called tuples or tuples. Sorry, just a spelling mistake. uh, so tuples. Then you can have event dict. Dict can be actually can be a sequence, cannot be a sequence, so it can be two things as well. So this is something called dictionary or dict. It might be a bit controversial to put it as a sequence, but it can have one value, it can have multiple values. Actually that holds true for all of it. So it's not like all these lists, tuples or dict, they have to have like multiple values. If you want, you can basically can store just a single value in these type of datas as well. And the thing is, we will do a lot of things with these data types, but just to showcase you just a basic sense of this, I would want to give you today, but we will probably work on it in much more detail later on. So a list is basically, as the name suggests, a list of data, right? And we basically refer them as through a third bracket, right? So you can see I have put third bracket, or it's also called square brackets. So now you just basically put all the data types and you separate them by a comma. So I can write probably three numbers, 5, 1, 7, 6, etc. So this is a list, and if I put the type of X, you would see it's a list. Now a list can have, as I just mentioned, a list can have one element or multiple elements inside, right? So I can write something like just 879, which is just a single number, and it would still remain a list. It's not like it's not a list anymore, it's still a list. Also, one of the cool thing about list is, as you saw, like I have put some integer values inside list, right? What I can do is I can put other types of data as well, like say for example I could have float 9.0, 24.3, things like that in list. Or I can also have different types of data inside a list, right? I can have a string which I need to define by quotes. I can write A, B, C. Then I can have an integer 7. I can have a float 9.0. So it's still not giving me an error because it's still valid in list. So in a list, first of all, there could be multiple elements or single element. Then you could have different data types inside a list. So you could have integer, float, string. There's also another data type called boolean, which just have just true and false, right? So bool type or boolean type of data, you could have that as well. You could have string. So you could have different data types in the string, and they could actually occur simultaneously as well inside a list. And you can actually access things inside of a list as well through index. So index is basically the position of the elements in a list. And just to tell you one thing which is very vastly different in Python with some other programming languages. So say for example I have a list. So A is a list which have like 9, 11, 13, 7, 4 elements inside it. So the length is basically how many number of elements are there. So the length of this particular list A is 4. And if I want, I can actually access any of these element through its position, right? So if we just in English we tell it, okay, 9 is in the first position, 11 in the second position, 13 is in the third position, and so on and so forth. But in Python, and listen to it very carefully, in Python indexing, so this is basically kind of indexing the position, right? In Python indexing start with 0. So the first element we refer it as 0th position, then the second element we call it first position, then the second position, and so on and so forth. But in, so this is where it differs with some other languages. In Python the indexing starts with 0 always. So what do we basically do when we want to access the first element? We tell them, okay, A is a list, try to access the 0th position of A, 0th position of A, and that's how you would get 9, right? And let's do that in actual terminal as well. So let's you I have already basically defined a list, right? So if I just type x, it gives me abc 7 and 9.0. So let's say I want to access the first item. So what would I write? X of 0. So again I write square brackets to just access that, and I write x 0 and it basically returns me abc, the first element. Similarly x of 1, it would give me the second position, that is 7. And the last, in this case, what is the last? Third position, that means I need to give x2 and I would get 9.0, 9.0. So this is how you access elements in the list, and later on when we actually move on to some more complex stuff, you would see that it's very convenient to access different parts of the list first of all, and also it's very convenient that we can actually have multiple data in a list. So this is why list is so common, use of list is so common. Sometimes it's called also called array. So array in other languages is very similar to what list is in Python. Okay. The other thing that that is very important is dictionary. Dictionary is nothing but so it's nothing like a English dictionary that you might have in your house. Dictionary basically usually have a key value pair, and they are defined by second brackets or curly braces. So you define a dictionary by through this, and you need to basically have a key and a value. So it's like just to showcase you over here. So a dictionary usually, say for example, I have a dictionary A, and a dictionary would be like it would have a key and it might have a value. Again, a key and a value. So this is also something which would be very useful in our later scenarios. And so this is basically how it goes. So these are the basic data types, built-in data types. There could be other data types as well which is not built in, and also this is not an exhaustive list as well. But what I try to do today is just give you some basic sense of how first of all type function works, and what are the different kinds of data types, and you can directly define them in Python without explicitly mentioning the data type. So you don't have to write like, okay, I am defining an int or integer, or you don't have to write explicitly, okay, I am defining a float. But Python interpreter can do it on their own, but also it basically makes them much slower than other languages, which where you have to explicitly write them down. And I also give you a sense of how to define this list, and what it looks like basically. And the end, we basically discuss how it looks like, and obviously we would go much deeper, but in later videos where we would see how different data types can interact, or can basically help you to write much more elaborate stuffs. So hopefully you have learned something and at least get some interest in exploring stuff in Python, and this would probably give you a good foundation in the later videos and in your journey to learning programming, Python programming and data science as well. So bye guys, keep learning until we meet next time.